All right, we are live. So I'm going to go ahead and just get us rolling. We already have people joining the live stream. And yeah, we'll just talk and then hopefully Dan, I think Dan's the only other one that might show up. So,
Okay.
all right, here goes. Hey, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. I'm your host this week, Charles Max Wood. Looks like Dan Shapiro just joined us. Dan, do you want to say hi? And we just barely started. So,
Hi, glad that I was able to make it on time. Can you hear me okay?
yep. All right. I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and we have a special guest this week. It is Owen Buckley. Owen, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us how awesome you are.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate the invite and happy to be here. Yeah, my name is Owen Buckley. I've been an enthusiast web developer for a very long time, since the days that broadband carried much excitement through the world, and have been professionally developing for about 20 years, primarily in web. Actually got my first job working on set-top boxes for like TVs and stuff, which was really an interesting application of JavaScript. But yeah, throughout my career, worked at agencies, consultancies, enterprises. So have been very fortunate to see a lot of innovation in web development, and yeah, really excited to talk about kind of where I kind of see web development today.
So
Awesome.
this episode is going to be about us old timers.
with a twist. With the twist,
Yeah,
there's the web's for everyone.
I have to say the set-top box thing, I've always wanted to build apps for the TV type thing. So Apple TV or Fire Stick or something like that. I've always thought that would be cool. So yeah, maybe someday. But yeah, I think we ran across your project Evergreen. And yeah, talking about full stack and web components and stuff like that. Which web components, it seems like it gets popular for a while and then people stop talking about it. I think it's popular again for a while. So yeah, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of an introduction as to where you are and what you're working on here, and then we can dive into the specifics?
Sure. So yeah, my project, the project Greenwood that I've been working on for a little while now, is, I guess, maybe a homage distillation of all the good things I've seen in web development, and maybe pushing back on, I guess, maybe the idea that while there's a lot of tools and options out there, not every project necessarily needs a high level of tooling and complexity to achieve, like, say, a landing page or a blog or something like that. And yeah, I think mostly just coming to realize that the web has gotten really, really, really good. I gave a local meetup talk few weeks ago called From Webpack to Web APIs, and was trying to use that as a mechanism to showcase that while Webpack did a lot of very cool things back in the day, it also kind of inverted some expectations around like how you could actually consume various file formats like CSS and JSON, and basically things that weren't JavaScript. But today, the web actually has a lot of capabilities to consume those file formats natively. And that's kind of really the theme behind Greenwood and Project Evergreen. Is the web has come a long way. You might be able to just use the web for a lot of the tooling and development that you might have had to rely on a tool in the past, because it's kind of the way the web works. The ecosystem, the community kind of pushes it forward, and then hopefully the great best and greatest makes it back into the platform. I think jQuery probably being the most classic example of taking all those good lessons and being like, oh yeah, we could just put this into the web. And to me, web components play a really useful role in that, because although they might be a little more low level in terms of, like, say, some of the authoring capabilities other libraries and frameworks give you, they're also really good for templating, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're just HTML tags. They
Mhm.
operate against just regular HTML. And so a lot of what Greenwood's also been pushing is how to get that on the client and server. If I have one component that I want to just render out as HTML on the server, can I do that? Yes.
Right.
If I need a little interactivity, could I still use that same definition on the client? The answer is also yes. And so kind of just built kind of around that concept and applied it to many web standards and techniques.
But can you be a bit more specific? I mean, so Project Evergreen, what is it? Is it something like a front-end framework? Is it something like a full stack framework? Is it something like a web server? What is
Mhm.
it at the end of the day, primarily?
Sure. So Project Evergreen is the basically kind of like the GitHub organization around a collective of projects. The main one that you would use in a day-to-day capacity is Greenwood, and that's kind of a hybrid between something like a Vite, which is primarily focused on like the local development experience, but also pairs that with like development, or like application scaffolding and conventions that you might get from like a Next or Nuxt or Svelte, like API routes and file-based routing and stuff like that.
Hmm.
The web uh, isn't going to account for everything, and so you're still going to want some sort of local development environment and some conventions to build your application. So yeah, Greenwood is basically trying to leverage web standards front to back, so you as an author could hopefully just rely on like MDN more, and I don't have to write as many docs to explain how these things work. I could just say we use, say, import attributes. That's how you reference JavaScript, CSS, JSON. So hopefully trying to reduce the surface area of the framework itself, which is great from a maintenance perspective, by leaning on web standards that exist today or are coming very soon. And in that regard, hopefully trying to help educate and make it more easy for new developers to onboard, because those skills are going to be very transferable. I'm learning web development. Oh, great. Here's, it's basically hopefully to kind of be the framework, or I call it the workbench, because we don't have like a lot of like framework code that you use from us. We just, like I said, it's kind of like Vite for development, but with a blend of kind of some of the next isms that you might get to build the application. But it ultimately boils down to web standards as much as possible for like the APIs, or how you would write, say, an API endpoint, like just request and response, like native
So,
request and response objects.
so if I'm understanding correctly, in a sort of a funny way, it's kind of like a meta framework, but without the
Mhm.
framework. So
Yeah.
you get the things that you commonly get from meta frameworks on top of frameworks, like
Hmm.
file-based routing, like API endpoints, like deployments and provisioning and bundling and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Only instead of like Next.js being on top of React and Nuxt being on top of Vue, in your case, you're on top of nothing.
I guess the closest analogy would be web components in terms of, next on top of React. So where, at least for a component model, would be on top of web components, but you don't have to. You could just build a regular HTML file if you want. That was actually kind of one of the biggest motivations a couple years ago when we started, was just, if I want to, can I literally just start with an index.html and go from there? If I don't need server side rendering, if I don't need API endpoints, can I still just prototype with HTML? Could I just practice web standards? So, and that's kind of why I like to refer to it more as like a workbench, because there isn't as, I've tried to avoid having as much ceremony as you might have with some of the other meta frameworks, mostly by trying to eliminate like bespoke APIs, because hopefully 9 out of 10 times I could just link to an MDN doc to kind of supplement that development workflow. But yeah, you're pretty much spot on.
Now, in terms of the web components, I know that often web components are used in the context of something like lit or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Is that also in your case, or you just
Mm-hmm.
do the web components, straight on vanilla JavaScript and the web APIs?
Uh, Both. By default, Greenwood supports, well, in the browser, it doesn't really have to do anything. But if you want to server render those web components, we do have a library called WCC that's baked into Greenwood. So vanilla web components, like your standard, extends HTML element, will work without any sort of additional setup. But it is easy to add lit and use that instead. And one of the things I tried to use, one of the approaches I took to try and emphasize that workbench is, if you want to use lit, npm install lit. It's in your package JSON. You're good to go. We have a plugin if you want to server render lit, and now you can use lit like it looks like in the docs in Greenwood. So, and this could extend to other tools like HTMX and Tailwind and all that stuff. So we hope that we provide a means for you to layer on what you want without getting in the way. Like a lot of other frameworks, meta frameworks, you might have to install their plugins, their wrappers around something like lit. We just want you to be able to install lit and use it like you would read from the lit docs. And if you're using their server rendering technology, we're going to honor that too. So we don't want to invent more things than we have to, or get in the way of you being able to, like, we could just link to Tailwind and say, here, just follow the steps for, installing it as a post CSS plugin. So
Now, one of the things, I think you also mentioned it, but I also saw that in the documentation and examples on your website, is that the routing is file-based routing. And kind of the similar model to what most people or most devs now expect from, again, solutions like Next.js and whatnot. This routing, the router that you create, it's a server-side router, right? Or put another way, it's the framework is what we refer today as multi-page applications, or how the web originally worked. These days we call it multi-page applications. A while back we just called them web applications.
Right.
But put another way, it's not about client side routing. It's whenever I go from page A to page B, I go back to the server to get a new page.
Yes. File-based routing expresses itself in Greenwood predominantly for like that MPA style mapping a URL to, a particular file, be it HTML or JavaScript if you're using server-side rendering as an option. And Greenwood does allow you to just build entirely a static site. So you could just build and just get a bunch of HTML files and deploy them to a CDN. You could actually run Greenwood as a server like you normally could, just a Node.js server you could deploy to any sort of like EC2 or Fly or Render. And additionally, we have, at least right now, for Netlify and Vercel, You can also build your application to run in a serverless environment. And through that adapter plugin, we'll make sure that like that file-based routing is configured the way that Netlify or Vercel expect, mostly around the serverless endpoints. They have their own unique like URL pattern that would break if we just expose, slash API slash, books, right? In a Netlify example, it might be like functions slash this slash that. And so we can honor that file-based routing through that configuration. So it's mostly about predictability. We do have, it's kind of experimental, but we do have a client-side router that you can opt into that kind of does a live wire HTMX type thing where it'll load partials of your pages so you can kind of sustain like the app shell, and it'll just kind of swap out the body tag as you navigate from page to page. So you can kind of have that spa-like experience, even though you built an entirely static site. And also you could just do a single page application too. I have an example of that I'm using with Lit. Might be better as a static app, but I did just want to have examples of, the various ways you could do that. And that's all just similar routing. Like if the single page application, you just do source index.html instead of source pages and all that stuff. So it's really easy to move between those different conventions, even at the page level. So you could have in your pages directory, you could have an about.html that would be static, and you could have, say, a products.js, and that would be server rendered. And so you can just have them side by side, and Greenwood will figure it out depending on how you want to deploy it.
And
obviously, server rendered route you can't deploy on a CDN, but that's where the serverless adapters come in.
And since you mentioned HTMX, can I use Greenwood together with HTMX?
It works. It works great. I'm glad you asked.
Well, it kind of makes sense because you're a meta framework without a framework. They're a framework without a framework. So it seems that it seems like a good match.
It's perfect, and this goes back to what we had wanted to really provide for a while, which is that kind of seamless interop from front end to back end. So I did just drop a link of a HTMX demo repo that I made, and it's kind of a mini e-commerce-y type application. So you could search for products, browse for products, and things like that. And what's interesting is, or what I hope it helps demonstrate that Greenwood can do, is you just install npm i HTMX, or you could just load it as a script tag. Like we let you write script tags. We let you write style tags, right? It's very HTML first from that perspective. We don't really want to get in the way between you and your code. It also makes sure that the code you write is almost one-to-one with the code you ship, maybe except for like minification or something like that. But in this demo, what I thought was really nice is so each product renders inside a card component, title, image, button to click. And that's a web component. It's just a vanilla custom element. And I can, in an API route, say for the search route, I can, in that API endpoint, call out, get a bunch of products, load a web component on the server, get all the HTML for the 10, 15, 20 cards. That gets returned as an HTML response. HTMX drops that in the page. Great. Now you've got your search results. But that card component is also a script tag in the head of the page, right below HTMX. And as soon as that HTML loads onto the page, the browser immediately upgrades that app card component. And now you can click the button and it'll say like you selected, product XYZ. So you wrote one card component entirely, like you could have copy pasted it out of MDN, and it works both client and server. So it's great for rendering HTML. You could also render JSON if you want, but I think the real value is that one card component can just be entirely HTML. But if you do need some interactivity through declarative shadow DOM detection, you can make that card component interactive on the client. You didn't have to do any sort of like none of the code that you wrote. Like I said, you could have literally copy pasted it from MDN. That's all you have to know is if you know how to write a web component, it works.
Now, so the one thing that I can think of where a framework might need to have slightly more extensive support for HTMX beyond being just, well, a web server is for the partial support. So sometimes based on the request headers, you might respond slightly differently to an HTMX request or to a page request that has HTMX in it. Is that something that Evergreen can handle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the API endpoints are kind of, if you've worked with serverless functions, the classic kind of boilerplate is you export, like a handler function. It takes in a request object as a parameter and you return a response object. So within that request object, you can totally use like URL search params. If you want to do stuff with query parameters, you can use headers, like the actual headers, native headers object. So you can introspect on those and then do any sort of logic you want. The API endpoints can return one line of HTML, many lines of HTML. You can totally pack in as much as you want. So within HTMX, depending on how granularly you want to define like your actions, your hypermedia actions, you can do it all in one or have very mini API endpoint. So with Greenwood's API endpoints, you control the entire response. So you don't have to worry about like stripping away like head tags or anything like that. You just whatever you want to return. So just like a classic API endpoint.
Now, again, listening to all the explanations and also looking at the Evergreen documentation and examples, there's obviously a project that's kind of similar, which is Astro.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to consider the differences between Evergreen and Astro, like what scenarios, are you more appropriate for? What scenarios maybe Astro is more appropriate for? What would be the differences between these two projects?
Yeah. So I think one of the philosophies that I tried to approach Greenwood with was that it felt like it could be something that like anybody with enough time could eventually realize. I think probably the starkest difference between something like Greenwood and Astro is that we're not necessarily trying to support all libraries and frameworks. One of the selling points of Astro is typically that you can bring your own library or framework. That's a lot of work to make that all possible. And on top of that, you have to kind of keep up with the roadmaps of each of those projects. Okay, React introduced RSCs. Are you going to support that? Vue is going to introduce Vapor. Are you going to support that? And I think maybe another question is, in exploring Astro, how does it compare to something like Next, which is tailor designed for React? And so I think one reason to consider Greenwood is if, just web standards and web components are the thing that aligns with you or makes sense to you, and you want to be able to write just HTML, and there isn't a lot of a lot of work happening underneath the hood. Hopefully, it just surfaces the developer experience, in a lot more familiar way. I think Astro's really cool, but thinking of it from the perspective of a solo maintainer, it does seem like it would be a lot of work to keep that project going. So, like we just kind of want to be we kind of want to find our niche, which is just web standards, web components, and kind of be the next of that, so to speak. Not,
So in a sense, you're closer to the metal and more directly built on the underlying web standards, if that's what I'm hearing. So it's less about
yeah.
how do I integrate this framework and that framework. I mean, sure, if you want to use a framework, you can always put in a script tag. But at the end of the day, if I'm thinking about the scenarios where I'd be using Evergreen, where Evergreen mostly shines, is if I want to be closer to the metal, you know, use it either just straight on vanilla JavaScript, maybe with lit, maybe with
Mhm.
HTMX, but not a lot more than that in most cases.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that, uh, you know, like I've noticed in some of like the Astro demos, if you want to use lit or you want to use some of the libraries, there's often like another package to install first. And I again, I think the webs come far enough, the toolings come far enough that philosophically, yeah, like you said, if you want to use lit, you can just install lit. I don't want to kind of put any like wrappers or packages or abstractions in front of that. So yeah, it might be kind of interesting to think like, well, if it's just the web, what do I need this for? But one really great example with that our focus allows us to go really deep on is web compatibility across the server, right? So investing in just making sure that you can template out some web components on the server, or be able to import CSS or CSS or JSON or even HTML in a way that we anticipate the standards will uh, go in. Like CSS and JSON modules are already standardized. HTML is an up and coming specification. So I'd say part of it is really just a way for us to figure out like what's worth focusing on. Going back to my intro where I uh, say how fortunate I am to see all the innovation in the web space. I take that as influence. It doesn't mean I want to write them all. And, I think there's a lot of value in that sort of innovation. But I guess the philosophy behind Greenwood is okay, what if we take all that inspiration, look at what the web offers, and provide and bring that into the experience, or more specifically, bring that to like the W3C. I participate in the web components community group. So there's a whole nother topic where we can maybe dive into where the web components community group iterates on these community protocols. So for things like, say, like a context like API that you might see in React, could there be a community protocol that all web components libraries could rally around? So uh, yeah, basically just trying to specialize on kind of one area of web development instead of trying to tackle all the possibilities.
Oh,
No, don't get me wrong. I really like the concept. I mean, I really like the concept that if I want to just do more or less vanilla JavaScript with web components, that I have, but I'm wary about all the effort of having to deal with routing and stuff like that, and bundling and
Mhm.
configuring the deployment. Like, what's the solution? And it's really great that Evergreen provides this route that I can use. That I can do vanilla JavaScript, and I can get all the benefits and I don't know amenities
Mhm.
that I would usually get from a meta framework, but without having to bring along all the baggage, specifically the framework.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
was
exactly.
I was actually going to ask something along these lines because yeah, it seems like to a certain extent it's either embracing the standards or maybe avoiding, as Dan put it, some of the baggage from some of the frameworks that are out there. But when it comes right down to it, I mean, what is the real benefit of that other than that you embrace the standards, or you didn't have to go and embrace some of the baggage on something like React or Vue or Angular? Is it performance? Is it
Ask
simplicity
Alex.
to
Yeah, ask
understand? Is it
ask
um,
Alex Russell. He will tell you.
Mhm.
that's true.
I would say there's a uh, couple ways I think that I view that. So I think one aspect is like from a developer or user is hopefully like predictability in terms of again the hopefully keeping the learning curve low, but when you do want to accelerate your learning curve, it's just an on ramp to more web
Right.
standards. And I'm a big advocate for teaching and learning. I've mentored a lot in my career, and so the fundamentals have always been, something I've
Mhm.
advocated for. Like, sure, I'm not saying don't use React, don't use Next and stuff like. Just like with anything in our industry, there's the right tool for the
Right.
job, and in some cases, something like a Next or like a React could make a lot more sense. Or also, if your business has been heavily invested in it, it's not to say go rewrite all that stuff. So hopefully, from at least the just like the again the like the predictability of kind of knowing what's at your fingertips and trying to uh, create an on ramp that's as um, close to web standards as possible has the flip side of from like a maintenance perspective that specification helps us answer a lot of decisions around okay we want to make an api endpoint, what's the design should be. Well, we've got request and response, like it should obviously be that. What's the way to link and embed JSON and CSS and HTML? Well, there's specs and standards for that. So hopefully from the other side of it, like the maintainer side of it, it helps us uh, and not have to come up with new APIs that you have to learn. Just make the ones that exist fit into what you might come to expect from a standard development workflow. Okay, yeah, in all projects I've been able to import CSS. Okay, you can do that. Just add with type equals CSS, and bang, now you've got a JS file that is not owned entirely by one meta framework, right? Um, so yeah, the predictability, the learning aspect, and I'll just say it for myself, like the maintenance aspect of it, as amazing as things like Next and Astro and whatnot are, they also come with a lot of work on the development and maintenance side. And so hopefully something like Greenwood can be very sustainable, even with a small maintainer team, but still benefit a lot of people
Mhm.
to the degree that it can before maybe it hits the tipping point of your particular application that says like, okay, yeah, maybe I need a React or something like that. So I think it's mostly ultimately, I think it just comes down to providing that option, right? I think there's plenty of room for everybody. And so at the very least, if we can just help highlight how far the web has come and then present it in a way that looks very familiar to how the tools have helped us get this far, um, I'd be very happy with that. But also, I love getting close to the standards and I think one of my favorite things having started working on this project is heavy participation with the web components community group, but also the winter CG bringing web standards and web components to serverless and edge runtime. So we benefit a lot from the collaboration that happens in something like Winter CG, where they're as committed to bring web standards to JavaScript runtimes, which is, makes me very happy to hear, because when something like that happens, not only can your JavaScript file move from framework to framework, but also from runtime to runtime, and you only just had to write the one way.
Yeah, I definitely agree that this interoperability between JavaScript runtimes, like would be the Bun
Mm-hmm.
or Dino or Node, obviously, but also Cloudflare
Mm-hmm.
workers and Vercel workers and whatnot. You know, that's a really big plus. And if you, because you're so simple and basically just use the underlying APIs, have a much easier time of it. I know, for example, we had Kevin from Dino
Mm-hmm.
on as a guest, and he talked about the challenges of getting Next.js to properly work on top of Dino. So
Mm-hmm.
having Evergreen is something really simple and straightforward that just runs is obviously a big benefit and an upside. Also, I really like the approach of being really close to the web standards, and I think the fact that it's called Evergreen kind of reflects this because it's evergreen knowledge. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
frameworks like we look at React as something that's been around forever and will be around forever. I don't know if that's the case. What I do know is that the web will be around forever.
Mm-hmm.
And what if whenever you're building on top of the underlying web APIs, you know, they'll they will be they will be supported now. They'll be supported on forever and on every device, and
Mm-hmm.
it just works. So obviously that's a big benefit. And I jokingly mentioned Alex Russell before, but he constantly talks about how we are over engineering the solutions that we're coming up with for the existing problems. And if you can basically just get a working solution from the underlying web platform itself, then it's a big win. Also for the user, because it's
Mm-hmm.
usually a much more streamlined and lighter weight type of a solution.
Exactly. Yeah, and as I mentioned, uh, learning and mentoring have been a big part of my career in the various positions I've held, and I've really fallen in love with the web all over again, because having been in consultancies and enterprise, the web, you don't find the web the web there a lot. It's not to disparage anything that I have used, but it did give me opportunities to work with Angular for few years, then work with React for a few years. And I think I'm not tribalistic in the sense of only use X, Y, or Z. I think the various options are great, and so I just wanted to provide a happy path for like web components and web standards, as you if going through Greenwood's docs and whatnot like that, you'll probably see a lot of inspiration from things like SvelteKit, from things like Next. And so it's just like, well, the web can have those too, but we'll just substitute a React component model with a web component model instead of Webpack to bundle all your assets. We'll just use the web standard API and just make that work under the hood and let you run it on the server as well as the browser, right? So Hopefully it could just be part of the choice that's out there. And I mean, there wasn't a lot of this back when I started, and I think it's just nice to see that all the innovation in developer experience and like application like design and development, that really this project is really made possible by the fact that people keep going back to web standards and asking for things like, hey, okay, we can import JavaScript. Why not CSS? Why not JSON? A couple of years later, you can now have a standards-based way to import CSS and JSON, right? And there's kind of a lot of what Webpack gave us that we didn't realize it was, and we kind of took it for granted. And now it's just there for the taking. And that's the next big feature I'm trying to get in, which I think is going to be really, really great. And it'll work. Node.js, browser, Vercel, all those places that you'd want it to.
So,
and I didn't have to come up with anything.
It sounds a little bit like there's a little bit of a story here to how you came to this, and I like a story. So why don't you tell us the story? Like, where were you, and how did you get to the point where you're not just, hey, this is a good idea to go to web standards, but I'm doing this, right? This is a thing that can happen.
Yeah, there is a story about maybe I guess at this point maybe 3 years or so ago. Now there was a conversation happening over on the MDN docs where they wanted to, I forget the specific nature, but they wanted to change the framework or the server rendering of the MDN docs itself. So they had a discussion and people are participating, and a lot of people suggested use web components. And one of the first things they said is, we can't server render web components. I was like, there it is. And it just started with that. It actually started with just running it through like the very first iterations of Greenwood. We were just running it through Puppeteer and, getting the HTML out that way. Then as our sites grew to server rendering and serverless, we're like, well, Puppeteer is really not going to scale that well. I realized there wasn't like a lit HTML SSR version of just regular HTML element. And so about 2 years ago, I created WCC, which is just the lower level tool of the very familiar render to string kind of API that you'd get from a React SSR. The homages are sprinkled everywhere, but in that sense, you could say, here's a path to a web component, give me the HTML. And then that became the default foundation for Greenwood, and did a talk about running web server rendering web components in I did Netlify and AWS, and that just kind of really made it click for me, like what the project's potential could be. And that's when I really started getting heavy into the Web Components community group and started contributing to our annual report to the W3C about kind of what are the latest and greatest needs from the community with web components, like what are some of the gaps that we could fill up, and then led to Winter CG because of the SSR and serverless story, and trying to be very active in all three and just try to absorb and learn as much as I can to make sure that Greenwood is able to provide that kind of web continuity no matter what platform you're writing for, and be in tune to what could be better in that experience and bring that back to those channels, talk to implementers. I can use this for prototypes, like, hey, here's a potential way to do HTML modules A or B or C, because that's how a lot of the web standards advancements work. they really rely on the community to help identify and prototype and kind of demonstrate the value of, if we had this thing, this is what we could get out of it. Like the next big one that I'm exploring is actual like templating in the browser. So if you've ever used like Mustache or Handlebars, the little double curlies,
Yep.
like there are proposals for that. So you might be able to get like that card component. You might just be able to do double curlies, like image URL, and then you could stamp out as many of those templates with like the the attributes that you're passing into your component, just there for free in the browser. And again, a lot of that is based on what other projects have done. So it's like, that's a good idea. Could that be in the web spec? You want me to prototype it? Here's a couple examples. Someone else has that. And then now you got a conversation going, and you got a couple browser vendors in the room, and just kind of goes from there.
Nice. One other question I have is, are there other people who are using this like to build not professional production application somewhere?
Not at the moment. I've just pretty much been working on it on the side, and actually just trying to build up the kind of like a better vision for the project. One thing that I'm working on right now is a new website with a new homepage and some just because it's been a couple of years since we wrote that, and we've grown so much that I want to make sure that it accurately reflects what the project's about, what the team is about. And I guess partially just maybe being a little bit shy, because there is so much great work from so many influential engineers that maybe there's a little sprinkle of imposter syndrome. But over the past year or so, being able to whip up an HTMX demo just like that, and being able to get like lit and SSR working, has kind of shown that, okay, the base foundation is sound. I can at least start delivering on this promise of bring your own if you want, and it'll still work. And so that's kind of really the plan for the rest of this year, is to kind of finalize those kind of standards and conventions about the project, and at least kind of nail down what that first 1.0 kind of specification would look like, and kind of start rolling it out and seeing what people think. So hoping to get there, but was just kind of cautious because things move so fast, and I didn't kind of want to overextend myself just being in my own bubble. So and also just I've got a couple more projects I want to build, so each one I use as a way to test out something like, say, dynamic routing. It's like there's some table stakes that are fairly common. I just want to make sure we've got at least a good answer, if not an implementation. So just kind of touch and go, but definitely open for anybody to try it. We've got Slack and Discords and GitHub discussions, so it's definitely there to use. There's definitely examples, but it is pre 1.0 at the moment.
One more thing, or two more things that I noticed, is the significant emphasis, at least in the documents, on Markdown. And the other thing is the use of YAML as a kind of a server-side scripting language, in a sense. The fact that you can put YAML blocks, if I understood correctly, at the top of files to set all sorts of values for inside the files, or did I misunderstand?
No, we do at the moment. We do have first-party support for Markdown, so you could do like an index.html, you could do an index.md, or an
Reminds me of Jekyll.
Yeah. and and yeah, the little YAML blocks that you see at the top of Markdown files are what they refer to as front matter. So there are ways to like in one of the examples, if I want to load a script only on this very specific blog post, I have a way to say, hey, just for this blog post out of the hundreds that this page template might be generating, I do want to throw in this like counter demo or a specific title. So it just adds a little more customizability to the markdown. But yeah, you can do a markdown file as well. So the core, I guess, formats out of the box for pages are HTML, Markdown, and JavaScript. I'm working on a PR now because we do have a plugin for TypeScript, but it doesn't yet support like pages as TypeScript. So that'll be coming. So if you use the TypeScript plugin, you'll be able to do pages/index.ts as well, or anything you can write a plugin for. That's one of our philosophies too, is we do have plugins, and those are basically ways to help differentiate kind of what is standard versus what isn't standard, right? So one maybe questionable decision we made is we made TypeScript a plugin instead of being in the core. Just like we made importing CSS and JSON a plugin instead of the core, but now that import attributes exist, this is one of the visions is plugins can become the core because they become web standards. And in the next release, I'll be able to deprecate 2 plugins entirely because the thing now is just a web standard. So maybe when types as comments become a standard, you won't need a TypeScript plugin anymore. So if we're still around then, I'll keep that one in the backlog.
It seems like you shouldn't hold your breath for that one.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you've got TSC as a plugin, so you can still take advantage of that.
Cool. Now, in terms of data access, any particular story there, or is it basically just NPMI?
Yeah, and for all your dependencies, you should be able to use whatever package manager you prefer. For local development, we use import maps. So we don't do any bundling during development. We basically just look at the dependencies in your package JSON and basically just walk all their like main and entry point files and use that to build up an import map that is then inserted into the HTML of whatever page you're developing on. And it's nice for like debugging because if you get an error, it's like literally right to the file that you want to go to. And for we don't have to like do any processing of your node modules other than just read the package JSONs, and we cache that result in memory while you're developing, so we don't have to keep hitting node modules every time you reload the page. For production, we will do run it through rollup just to do a little bundling, but I would like to get a feature in where you could basically deploy unbundled if you want to. So depending on, because the ability to do that, is something that you probably want to benchmark and profile. If you've just got a few script tags, just throw it out as is, as you have in your like source directory. If you've got maybe lots of pages, lots of components, bundling might be a useful optimization. So like I said, we bundle for production by default and unbundle in local development, but we would like to give you the option to go unbundled for production at some point.
That's really interesting, but it's not what I asked. No, but it's good that you explained that because that's really useful information. But I was specifically asking about if you have any preferences or guidelines or whatnot about accessing the data layer, like a database or something like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry. So with our server rendered pages or the API routes, you're basically in a server environment. So like one of my projects for a little YouTube music streaming show I do myself, we use Contentful for like all the event posts. And in that project, I statically build the homepage that has like the upcoming events in it. And so in that like index.js file, I could just call Contentful using their SDK and grab those events and build that all out as HTML. So yeah, you're entirely capable of hitting a database, hitting a CMS, hitting the file system. So if you want to like build up a bunch of static content that way, or or if you want to do it at request time, that's totally possible. And we do want to add the feature like you get in Next.js, where you have like say the bracket ID.js that does like the dynamic path routing. So that's a feature we'll be adding to our SSR pages as well. So
What
to
was
kind of
that? I
flesh
missed it.
out. Yeah. So in tools like Next.js, say you have a template for your blog posts, right? So you've got and you've got like 100 blog posts, but you only want one JS file, and you basically just pass in like the title, the heading, hero image, and stuff like that. The way that Next supports that is in your pages directory, instead of say like blog.js, you would put square brackets
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
id.js.
yeah. Of
So,
course.
because we have a plugin that allows you to fetch external content and kind of feed that into Greenwood, but that next paradigm's a lot more, I believe, ergonomic, because instead of having a plugin with all your content fetching over here, you could just
Mm.
literally have it in the page where you're also defining the template. So we want to kind of refine that. But yeah, I've got some projects that use Contentful. I've got another project that I'm just calling regular SQL to a planet scale database. And I mean, you could conceivably use Greenwood as just a back end of APIs if you wanted to.
Cool.
All right, I'm gonna push us toward picks. We've been talking for almost an hour, which is always fun, and this has been really interesting. I guess to just wrap it up, two questions. One is if somebody wants to start using Evergreen or Greenwood, is there kind of a getting started guide somewhere that people can pick up?
Yeah, sure. If you go to greenwoodjs.io, we've got a getting started button right there on the homepage. We have compatibility with StackBlitz. So from that page, you can just jump right into it on StackBlitz and run it. You can clone the companion repo that we have, or if you want jump right in the code or follow along with the guide. So we got a few different options to get you up and running just to play with it.
Cool. And then the other question is, if people want to connect with you on the internet, where do they find you?
Yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter /X at the Greenhouse IO, all one word. And my website is also thegreenhouse.io. So you'll see more activity on the Greenwood.js website, but I do occasionally post. And on Twitter, I'm usually just shouting out about things I'm working on for Greenwood, little demos. So if you want to see what the next release of Greenwood's going to have, my Twitter will probably be showing all those little code snippets sporadically.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do our picks. Dan, do you want to start us out?
Sure. I don't have that much in way of picks today. I will want to shout out one thing. So, as I guess people obviously know, there's a war going on here. It's not as high intensity as it was before, but it's still ongoing. That's the war in Gaza between Israel and Hamas, the Hamas government of Gaza. Was it the government of Gaza? But anyway, my pick is a debate that was organized and moderated by Lex Friedman on his YouTube channel. On the one side, he had Benny Morris, who's a well-known Israeli historian, who's done a ton of research on the whole founding of Israel and the Zionist movement and the Palestinians and whatnot. With him on his side of the debate, you might say, call it the Israeli um, side perspective, even though he's not Israeli, was the YouTuber or streamer Destiny. I don't know how familiar you are with him, Chuck. He does political commentary. But again, he's not Israeli; he's American, and he doesn't really have, he's not Jewish or anything. But
Yeah, I've heard of him.
yeah, I'd still, I guess they kind of presented the Israeli narrative, although both of them are very much opposed, as I am, to the current Israeli government. On the other side of the discussion were Finkelstein and Rabbani, who presented the Palestinian narrative, and they talked about anything and everything from 1948, Zionism, the founding of Israel, all the way to the current conflict and their different positions and take on the situation. It got pretty heated at sometimes. One big caveat is that it's a really long thing. They said, from what looking, I haven't watched all of it. It's almost 5 hours long. It is divided into chapters. So, if you're only interested in certain parts or want to watch it in parts, or, watch it until you've had enough of it, then you definitely can. So I will share the link to that. Um, I
I just
haven't watched
posted it to
all.
the comments. I found the
Yeah,
YouTube.
I haven't watched all of it, but it's interesting. It didn't really, nothing that I personally didn't know before, but still very interesting for those of you who want to really understand the opposing views that are underlining this conflict that's been ongoing for, well, a century, more or less, in a lot of ways. So that would be my pick for today.
Awesome. I'm gonna jump in with my picks. A couple of things. First of all, um, I always do a board game pick, so a little lighter fare, I guess, than the Israel Palestine debate. Though I think it's important for people to understand the perspectives that are involved. So definitely go check that out, even if you have to kind of consume it in pieces. Because I've heard, like I told Dan, I've heard some of the names involved, and they seem to know in depth certain aspects of this, and so you'll definitely come out of it understanding better what the debates are, what the arguments are. So I'm going to pick a game called The White Castle, and it is a game. So the games always have like a theme, right, or a setting. Some of them it's pretty thin, right? It's just we gave you just enough to move the pieces around and make it interesting for you to try and win. And some of these are a little more involved. This one's a little bit more involved. I am not in love with some of the design on it. It was a little bit hard to follow some of the time, and it was mostly because the artwork and things just. So like they had icons. You have three different kinds of what workers, I guess. I mean, your dice are your workers in this game. It's a fairly complicated game. Board Game Geek weights it at 3.01, which is probably one of the more complicated games I've ever picked. I've picked a couple that are in the fours, but anyway, so just be aware. This one's a little bit more involved. And what you do is you roll the dice, you place the dice as workers, you get the benefits. And some of the benefits are that you get to place your farmer, your courtesan, or your samurai. And as you place them, again based on dice rolls, you get more points, you get certain benefits, things like that. So you can place the courtesan, and then you move the courtesan up through the house up to the top level. And when you get to the top level, you get more points, you get a benefit. And I'm really slimming this down because it would take me forever to explain to you all how to play it. But it was really kind of fun, and I kind of wish I could play it again a couple more times. I played it at SaltCon a couple weeks ago, which is the board game conference that I went to. And anyway, I really liked it. But yeah, the icons, like the icon for the farmer, it looks kind of like a bridge, which doesn't make any sense. And then the icon for the courtesan was, I don't even remember what it was, but the icons did not match up with what you would want them to tell you, right? So you always had to be looking it up and, oh yeah, this means I get to place this, right? And so as you're getting ready to play your die, because you pull the dice off the bridge and then place them, when you're getting ready to do that kind of placement, then you're constantly trying to figure out, okay, what is that and what is that? Oh yeah, that's this. And anyway, so that's my main complaint with it. But overall, like, the gameplay and the flow was pretty good, and definitely some interesting and different mechanics to it. I mean, I've played enough board games to where I don't see new mechanics all that often, but this was an interesting blend of mechanics that you commonly see in some of these worker placement and dice games. So I'm going to pick that. I'm also working on getting JavaScript Geniuses launched. So if you want a weekly call where we get on and we talk about different things related to JavaScript, maybe have an expert like Owen or like Kevin, who we had last week, or people like that come on. I'm kind of aiming for every other week having an expert, and then every other week it'll be a discussion of either questions that people pose beforehand, right, so that I can prep and other people can prep and say, okay, here's the answer to your question, or where we just sit down and talk, right? And we're just like, hey, we're going to do a breakout room for 5 minutes, and then we're all going to come back together and we're going to talk about, some stuff related to JavaScript and web development, and then go back out into breakout rooms, or however we decide that's going to work in the best way. I kind of want to experiment with that piece because I want people to get to know each other and kind of build your network. I hate the terminology of building your network, but get to know other people who you can collaborate with and have a relationship within the community. So anyway, if you're looking for that, I should have the page up here within the next few days as we record this, which is on March 18th. So yeah, March 20th, 21st. Keep an eye out. Go to javascriptgeniuses.com and you can sign up. And I'm definitely interested in doing that. If you want to talk to me about it first, you can do that too. Just email me, chuck@topenddevs.com, and I'll get back to you on that. The other one is I keep having people ask me how to start a podcast. So I'm going to put a course up for that. That'll be up at podcastplaybook.com. Again, similar time frame. I have to get some stuff together, before you can sign up. But we're definitely going to be doing that. It's going to be a 6-week program since it's the pilot. I've seen programs like this priced in the 2000s. But since it's my pilot program and I'm going to be, ironing out some of the wrinkles, I'm charging $500 a head. So if you want to join in and start your own podcast, then go to podcastplaybook.com and you can sign up for $500. And that's what I got. Owen, what are your picks?
Yeah, I got 2. One coming out of somewhat related to our conversation today is I actually just finished Hypermedia Systems, the book that was co-authored by Carson Gross, the creator of HTMX. And yeah, it was a nice kind of refresher on some of those early, motivations of things like REST, at least how it was initially conceived by Roy Fielding, and kind of maybe how it's morphed to be more synonymous with JSON APIs over time. So it was really good. Lots of good practical examples of HTMX as well, but I was a little more invested in the history lesson aspects of it. And the cover is really, really cool. So you can actually just get the cover as a poster. It's that cool. And so, yeah, give that a shot if you're interested in HTMX or the history of HTML a little bit. My second pick is a music pick. So I've been really loving the new album by The Smile, which is part of, which is from a couple members from Radiohead. The new album is called Wall of Eyes. Really nice album, some really great production on that. So if you like Radiohead or Tom York and you haven't heard of that album, by all means, give it a try. Different producer than they normally work with just because of timing conflicts, but have no fear. It sounds great as you would expect. And this was a follow-up to their first album from a couple of years ago. And it's really great to see their progress working as a trio. So that's what I got for the show.
Awesome. I just posted our interview with Carson Gross from October
yeah.
of last year. So yeah, if you're into HTMX, or you want to know a little bit more about it, definitely check that one out.
I think
They
we had
got-
him on twice.
We did. The other one was quite a long time ago.
Mhm.
Hmm.
You got 2.0 coming out soon, so maybe come back.
Yeah,
for
that
the third
was
time.
that was the main topic of our last conversation with
Yeah.
him, the upcoming 2.0 version of HTMX.
Nice.
Yeah, we also had him in December of 2021, and it was when he was switching HTMX over from Intercooler.
Mm-hmm.
I'll post that
Very
link
cool.
here real quick too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's everything. This was a lot of fun. Very interesting stuff. We'll wrap up. Until next time, folks. Max out.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Hang on for a
Thank you.
second. We're going to make sure.